It started in my little apartment kitchen. The counters were always covered in ingredient spices I'd found at a market, herbs from my little window box. It was my sanctuary, cooking wasn't just about eating, it was a language, the sizzle of garlic in olive oil, the way the tomatoes broke down into sauce. It was how I made sense of the world. I'd spend hours on a Sunday trying to recreate a memory of a dish my grandmother made, or just experiment, combining flavors that felt right. It was messy. And it was mine. Ached. I'd study flavor profiles until my head spun. His voice was the ghost in my kitchen, and I was determined to exorcise it with excellence. He ate the entire dish in silence. He sat back, and for the first time I saw Michael Anders look defeated. It wasn't anger, it was a profound, weary acknowledgement. He knew the technique was flawless, sear, the seasoning, the balance. But it was more than that. The food had a spirit he could never replicate in his kitchen of fear. He had built his career on the idea that greatness required cruelty. My food, my restaurant, was living proof that he was wrong. His mockery had been a fortress he built to protect his own insecurities, his own fear of being surpassed, and I had simply built a garden outside his walls. He asked for the check. He didn't ask to see me. He just left. As he walked out the door, he glanced back toward the kitchen window. Our eyes met for a second. There was no nod, no smile, just a look. And in that look, I saw it all, the respect he could never voice, the realization of his own failure, and the silent admission that my name on the door wasn't just a name anymore. It was a philosophy, and it had won. It started with a passion, a simple, quiet passion for cooking. For me, it was never about fame. It was about the sound of onions sizzling in a pan, the smell of fresh herbs, the quiet satisfaction of creating something from scratch. I started a small account, just a little corner of the internet for myself. I'd post videos of what I was making. The camera work was shaky, the lighting was just my kitchen lamp. But it was real. It was my little sanctuary. Then he founded a food critic and influencer with millions of followers. His whole brand was this acerbic, sharp-tongued wit. He built his audience by tearing things down. And one day, he stumbled upon my video. It was a simple pasta dish, something my grandmother taught me. He didn't just dislike it, he eviscerated it. He shared my video to his massive audience with a caption that was just pure venom. He called my cooking an affront to Italian nonnas. Everywhere he said the plating looked like something a toddler would assemble. He mocked the way I seasoned the dish, the way I chopped the garlic, even the humble bowl I served it in. And then it went viral, not the good kind of viral, the kind where your notifications explode. But every single one is a dagger. My phone wouldn't stop buzzing, thousands of comments, people I'd never met from all over the world telling me I had no talent, that I should give up cooking forever, that I was an embarrassment. They created memes from my video, superimposing my face onto cartoon characters, adding sound effects of gagging. It was a tidal wave of hate, and I was drowning in it. I felt so exposed, like my quiet little joy had been ripped out of my kitchen and put on a global stage for everyone to laugh at. I remember sitting on my kitchen floor, the tiles cold, just scrolling through this endless sea of cruelty. I felt so small, so utterly devastated. I had a choice to make. I could delete everything. I could retreat from the internet, completely go back to cooking just for myself, and try to forget it ever happened. Or I could do something else. The anger started to burn away the humiliation. This was my passion, this was my craft. And I refused to let someone like him, someone who made a career out of cynicism, take it from me. So, I made a decision. I would use this attention, this horrible, unwanted spotlight, as fuel. I posted a response video. It was just me sitting at my kitchen table. I didn't yell, I didn't fire back with insults. I simply looked into the camera and said, "You're right, I have a lot to learn, and I'm going to learn it, watch me." And then I started documenting everything, the real work. I signed up for culinary classes at a local community college. I filmed my homework, my failed attempts at knife skills, the sauces that broke, the cakes that collapsed. I was brutally transparent. I'd hold up. The grind was relentless. Culinary school was brutal. The chefs were tougher than Mark ever was, but their criticism was constructive. It was meant to build, not break. I fell behind at first. My knife skills were sloppy. My timing was off. I'd come home smelling of grease and failure, and I'd just lie on the floor wondering if Mark had been right all along. But I kept going. I practiced mother sauces until I could make them in my sleep. I learned about temperatures, about sourcing, about the science behind the lumpy, underproofed loaf of bread. And say, well, that's not right. Let's figure out why. I started developing my own recipes, not my grandmother's, but my own fusion dishes. that combined the techniques I was learning with the flavors I loved. Slowly something began to shift, the trolls got bored, and moved on to their next target. But a new audience started to gather, people who were inspired by the honesty, by the determination. They saw someone who wasn't a professional chef, someone who was on a journey, just like them. The comments section, transformed instead of hate, it became a place of encouragement. Y'all get the béarnaise sauce, next time your knife skills are getting so much sharper. That flavor combination sounds incredible. My followers started suggesting ideas, becoming a kind of massive global test kitchen. They'd try my recipes at home and report back with photos and feedback. This digital community, this group of people who had rallied around a shared idea of growth, became my greatest source of strength. The community grew from a few hundred to tens of thousands, then hundreds of thousands. It wasn't just about me anymore, it was about us. We were all learning together. The dream of a restaurant, which had always felt like a distant fantasy, started to feel possible. It was my followers who first suggested it. You should open a place. They'd comment, "We'd all come." At first I laughed it off, but the idea stuck. And then someone else suggested a crowdfunding campaign. Let your community build this with you. So we launched it. I was terrified. What if no one contributed? But the opposite happened. The campaign funded in a matter of days. People who had been following my journey for years, people who had watched me get mocked and then pick myself up, they invested not just with money, but with messages of belief. It was the most humbling experience of my life. This restaurant wasn't being built by a bank loan, it was being built by a community. And the whole time he was watching the critic, he never apologized. He'd occasionally make a snide comment, a passive-aggressive tweet about hype over substance. But his voice was just a tiny irrelevant squeak. In the chorus of support I now had, in a strange way, his initial mockery was the catalyst. It was the spark that lit this entire fire. He gave me a platform, even if it was a platform he never intended to. The day the physical location was secured, I stood in the empty, dusty space. It was just a shell. But I could see it, I could hear the chatter, smell the food. And I knew its name instantly. It had to be my name, not some clever, trendy title. My name, a statement. This place was the physical manifestation of my journey, from that humiliated person on the kitchen floor to this moment. Every detail was infused with the story. The menu featured the dishes I had developed and perfected with my online community. There was even a community kitchen section featuring a dish suggested and voted on by my followers each month. The grand opening was surreal. It wasn't just a restaurant opening, it was a reunion. Followers flew in from different countries, people I had only ever known as usernames, and profile pictures were shaking my hand, giving me hugs. The room was filled with this incredible positive energy. It was the digital community made real. And yes, I invited him, the critic. I sent him a personal invitation. I didn't do it to be petty or to gloat. I did it as a final proof of concept. I did it to close the circle. Art. He showed up. He tried to be inconspicuous, standing in the corner with a glass of wine, observing. I watched him from the kitchen. He tasted the food, the very same dishes he had mocked years ago, now refined, now served in this beautiful, bustling space. I saw his expression change. The cynical mask slipped for a moment. And I saw genuine surprise, then appreciation. He finished his meal, asked to speak to me. He stood there in the middle of the restaurant that his own cruelty had helped inspire, and he finally said the words I never needed to hear, but that he clearly needed to say. I was wrong, he said. This is exceptional. You've built something remarkable. But his apology wasn't the victory. The victory was the packed dining room, the laughter, the sound of clinking glasses, the smell of food that I had created, that we had created. The triumph was seeing my name on the window, not as a target for mockery, but as a beacon, a symbol of what can happen when you turn humiliation into fuel, when you let a community lift you up, and when you refuse to let anyone else define your passion. The digital world had given me the worst moment of my life. And then through sheer will and the support of strangers, it had given me the best one too. All that noise, all that hate, it all led here, to this quiet, solid, real thing, a place with my name on it. It was the smallest room in the apartment, the kitchen, but for me it was the whole universe. The hiss of olive oil in the pan, the smell of garlic turning golden, the rhythmic chop of a knife on the cutting board. This was my language, my real voice. And I shared that space with him, our home. But it never felt entirely like mine. He'd wander in, leaning against the doorway, watching me with this look, not admiration. It was something else, an assessment, a critique waiting to happen. I'd be trying out a new recipe, something I'd spent days thinking about, something I was sure could be the cornerstone of the little bistro I dreamed of opening. I'd plate it carefully, a splash of color, a garnish of fresh herbs. I'd hand him the fork, my heart pounding, like I was handing him a piece of my soul. He'd take a bite, chew thoughtfully. And then the verdict would come: it's a bit salty, don't you think, or the texture is off. But it was never just about the food, it was the follow-up, the real point. He always had to make. It's a nice hobby, sweetheart, but a business. Be realistic, the failure rate for restaurants is astronomical. You need a solid, dependable income. You need me. And that was the dynamic: him, the realist, the anchor; me, the dreamer, the flight risk, who needed to be tethered to the ground. He framed his criticism as protection, as if he was saving me from my own foolish hopes. And slowly, without me even noticing at first, it worked. The passion I felt when I cooked began to get tangled up with this knot of anxiety in my stomach. I'd second guess my seasoning, I'd overcook the pasta, because I was worried he'd say it was too al dente. The kitchen, my sanctuary, start feel like a testing ground where I was perpetually failing. My confidence didn't shatter all at once, it was worn down day by day, comment by comment, like a stone smoothed by a constant dripping tap. I started to believe him, that this was just a silly fantasy, that I wasn't capable. Final comment wasn't even the cruelest one he'd ever made. That was the worst part. It was so casual, so offhand. I'd made a dish my grandmother taught me. It was my comfort food, the thing I made when I needed to feel grounded. It was perfect, I knew it was. He took a bite and pushed the plate away. It's fine, he said, already looking back at his phone. Tastes like every other sauce you make. Honestly, if you ever did open a place, you'd need a real chef, someone with actual training. He said it to the. Then there were the small victories: the first time I perfectly seared a scallop, getting that beautiful golden crust; the day my instructor tasted my béarnaise and just nodded a simple good, very good. That tiny acknowledgement meant more than any praise I'd ever received. I started cooking for friends, for anyone who would let me. I'd host little pop-up dinners in my apartment, testing dishes, getting real feedback. The buzz was positive, people were excited. They'd ask when I was going to open a real place. Screen, not even to me, as if my dream was so insignificant it didn't even warrant eye contact. And something in me just clicked. It wasn't a loud, dramatic breaking point. It was a quiet, cold certainty. This wasn't protection. This wasn't love. This was a slow suffocation. He didn't want a partner. He wanted an audience for his own superiority. He needed me to be small, so he could feel big in that moment, looking at the plate of food that represented my history. My love dismissed with a glance. I saw the future, a future of smaller and smaller kitchens, of quieter and quieter dreams, until there was nothing left of me at all. Ending, it was the hardest thing I'd ever done. The conversation was a blur of his disbelief, his anger. He couldn't understand. He'd provided stability, a roof over my head, and his parting shot, as I was carrying a box of my own knives out the door, was exactly what I expected. Y'all see, he said, his voice cold. Y'all come crawling back. When you realize you can't make it on your own, you need my stability. This little restaurant fantasy, it'll be bankrupt in a year. You have no idea how the real world works. But for the first time, his words didn't find their mark. They bounced off this new hard shell of resolve that had formed inside me. The freedom was terrifying, but it was intoxicating. I found a tiny, awful apartment with a kitchen the size of a closet. And I cooked for myself. There was no one to critique the acidity of the tomato sauce, or the doneness of the meat. I remembered what it was like to cook for the pure joy of it, to experiment, to fail spectacularly, and laugh about it, learning from the mistake instead of being shamed for it. I rediscovered my own voice in those flavors. It was stronger than I remembered, more unique. It had a story to tell. The restaurant was born in that tiny kitchen. It wasn't just a business plan anymore, it was a sanctuary. I was building brick by brick, recipe by recipe. I found a space, a narrow storefront on a side street with terrible wallpaper and ancient flooring. But it had good light, every decision from the color of the wall, so warm, earthy terracotta. The selection of every single chair was mine. The menu was my life story on a page, the pasta dish from my grandmother, the spice blend I'd discovered on a trip I took alone, the dessert that was my first successful experiment in my new apartment. It was all me, unfiltered, unapologetic. I heard through mutual friends that he'd heard about the project. He'd laugh about it. That little vanity project. He'd say she's pouring her savings into a dump on Maple Avenue. It's a tragedy waiting to happen. His skepticism was like a familiar old coat. It didn't fit me anymore. And I started to believe it was possible. Opening night was pure undiluted terror, but it was my terror. I owned it. And then the reviews came in. They weren't just good, they were emotional. Critics and customers alike talked about the heart in the food, the passion, the sense of welcome and home. They got it. They understood the story I was telling on the plate. We were a hit, a real genuine success. And then a month in, my hostess brought me the reservation list for a busy Saturday night, and there it was, his name table for one at 8 o'clock. My stomach rolled. But the fear was quickly replaced by a calm. I hadn't expected this. Wasn't an invasion, it was a completion. I saw him the moment he walked in. He looked the same, but out of place. He was trying to act casual, but his eyes were scanning everything, taking in the warm, bustling room, the happy murmur of conversations, the look of contentment on the faces of the people eating my food. He was seated at a small table near the kitchen. I made sure I was the one to bring out his main course. When I approached the table, the plate in my hands felt not like a burden, but like a crown. He looked up at me, and I saw it, the flicker of surprise, then confusion, then something that looked uncomfortably like regret. I wasn't the anxious woman he remembered from our kitchen. I stood straight. My chef's jacket was crisp, there was a smudge of flour on my sleeve, and I was proud of it. I placed the plate in front of him. Your sea bass, I said. My voice was steady, calm. He didn't say anything about the food, he just stared at me. You really did it, he finally stammered. I did, I said, and I smiled. It wasn't a smile of triumph. Not really, it was a smile of quiet assurance, of peace. He ate his meal in silence. I watched him from the pass, saw him take every bite with a focused intensity, as if he was trying to find a flaw, some justification for his past disbelief. But he found none. He asked for the check, without ordering dessert. As he was signing the credit card slip, he looked toward the front door. And I saw him truly see it. For the first time, the name of the restaurant displayed in elegant, lighted letters on the window. It was my name, my maiden name, not the Maple Avenue Bistro or something clever. It was just my name, a permanent public declaration that all of this was mine. I had built it not with his stability, but with my own 2 hands, and the passion he had tried so hard to extinguish. He left without saying goodbye. He just walked out into the night, and I stood there in the heart of the sanctuary I had built from the shattered pieces of my dreams, surrounded by the happy sounds of my new life. The space he left behind wasn't empty. It was filled to the very brim with everything I had created on my own. Remember those tiny apartments? We had the ones where if you opened the oven door, it would hit the refrigerator. That's where it started, just the 2 of us. Every Sunday night, our amateur supper club. It was never about anything more than the pure joy of it. You'd bring over some weird ingredient you found at the market. I'd have a recipe I'd been dying to try. The kitchen would be a disaster zone. Flour everywhere, every pot and pan we owned dirty. And the smell, that was the best part, the smell of garlic. Finding the location was a nightmare. Every place was too expensive, or the wrong size, or had impossible zoning. I must have looked at 24 spaces. I was about to give up when I found it, a small narrow spot on a side street. It needed everything. It was a blank, dusty canvas. But it had character, and the price was just barely within the realm of my tiny, painstakingly acquired loan. The bank manager had looked at my business plan with the same skepticism Mark had, but the numbers were solid. Sizzling in olive oil, of fresh herbs, of something braising for hours. It was our church. And the people, our friends, crammed into that little living room, plates on their laps, laughing. That was the real reward, the sound of a room going quiet, because everyone was eating. That moment where someone would take a bite, close their eyes, and just nod, that was everything. The rivalry at first was the best part of it. It was this fun little game we played. You'd make this incredibly complex dish, all these fancy techniques, and I'd counter with something simple, but done perfectly, a seared scallop with a brown butter sauce against my slow-roasted chicken with lemon and thyme-wed teas. Each other mercilessly. You'd call my food peasant food, and I'd call yours over-engineered. But it was always with a laugh, always. It was our thing. But then I started to notice a shift. It was subtle at first, a comment about my plating, a bit rustic, don't you think, you'd say. Then it was the ingredients. If you used real saffron instead of turmeric, you'd actually get the right flavor. The teasing lost its warmth, the laughter behind it dried up. The real turning point was the night I made that pasta. Remember, it was so simple, just fresh pappardelle, with a wild mushroom ragu I'd been working on for hours. The room loved it, they were raving. And I saw your face, you were smiling. But it was tight, your eyes were just cold. Later, when we were cleaning up, you picked up the empty pot. It's good, you said, not looking at me, for a simple homey dish. It's comforting, you're really good at comfort. And you said that word comfort like it was an insult, like it was a synonym for mediocre. That was the first time I felt the sting, the first time I thought, oh, this isn't a game to him anymore. After that, the mockery became the main ingredient in every one of our cooking sessions. If I baked a loaf of bread, you'd talk about the precise hydration levels I'd missed. If I made a stock, you'd question why I didn't use a pressure cooker to extract more flavor faster. It was a constant critique, a drip 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 of dismissal. You were no longer my friendly rival, you were my judge. And the verdict was always the same: not good enough, not ambitious enough. The friendship, the thing that was supposed to be the foundation of all this, started to feel thin, brittle. Then you dropped the news you were going pro. You'd found investors, you were opening a restaurant, a real restaurant. You said not some hobby, you laid out the whole vision, the minimalist decor, the avant-garde menu, the tasting courses. It was all about technique, innovation, pushing boundaries. And you looked at me. And you said you should stick to what you're good at. These little dinner parties, it's a nice safe space for you. Safe. There was that word again. You framed my desire for soulful, honest food as a lack of courage. My slow and steady approach was just fear of real competition. Done the work. That was the fracture, the final crack. We stopped having our Sunday nights. The texts about a new recipe dried up, the friendship just evaporated. And in the silence it left behind, I made a decision. It wasn't about beating you. It wasn't about proving you wrong. It was about proving myself right. I was going to build my own place. But I was going to do it my way. No investors demanding flashy returns. No rush, just me, my hands, and the food I believed in. The race was on, but we were running on entirely different tracks. Your restaurant, Apex, was a whirlwind of construction. I'd see the updates online, the imported Italian tiles, the custom-made chefs table, the press releases about the visionary menu. It was all hype and velocity. Meanwhile, I was in my own space, a smaller, quieter location I'd saved for years to afford. I was sanding the floors myself. I was at the farmer's market at 5 in the morning, every morning, feeling tomatoes, talking to the growers. I was testing a bolognese sauce for the 10th time, trying to get the balance of milk and wine just right. My philosophy was simple: substance over style, soul over spectacle. You opened first, of course. The buzz was immediate. There were articles, photos of the beautiful people in your beautiful dining room. The initial reviews were good, full of words like daring and innovative. I went once anonymously. The food was technically perfect, every element was precise. But it was cold. It felt like a demonstration, not a meal. There was no heart in it. And you, in your pristine chef's jacket, moving through the dining room, you seemed more like a conductor than a cook. You gave an interview around that time, and you were asked about the local dining scene. You mentioned my place, which was still weeks from opening. You called it a quaint little bistro, and said you hoped the city was ready for real ambition. The mockery had gone public, and instead of hurting me, it just solidified my resolve. I delayed my opening by 2 weeks. I wanted everything to be right. When my place, the Hearth, finally opened its doors, there was no big marketing push. I didn't have one. I just turned on the open sign. The name said it all. It was about warmth, about gathering. The menu was short: a few pastas, a roast chicken for 2, a braised short rib that cooked for 8 hours. Simple things, done with the best ingredients and a lot of care. It started slowly. A few customers trickled in, but then they came back, and they brought friends. The word spread not through ads, but through whispers. You have to try the bread. The ragu tastes like Italy. The room was always full of this warm, happy noise, the sound of people enjoying themselves. It felt like those old supper clubs, just on a bigger scale. Then came the review. Alina Graves, the most feared and respected critic in the city, she visited every place anonymously. We knew she'd been to Apex. Her review had been mixed, praising the technique, but questioning the soul. She'd mentioned the chilly atmosphere. I didn't even know she'd been to my place, until a friend texted me a link. My hands were shaking so much I could barely hold my phone. I read it standing right there in my kitchen. She started by talking about the current trend in dining, the focus on molecular gastronomy and deconstruction. She called it impressive, but often emotionally sterile. Then she wrote, "And then you walk into the hearth." She described the smell of wood-fired oven and rosemary. She wrote about the bread, calling it the best in the city. Full stop. She described my pappardelle with wild mushroom ragu. She said it was a dish that didn't seek to impress you with complexity, but to comfort you with its profound honesty. She said it was the kind of food you remember for days, not just because it tasted good, but because it made you feel good. She ended the review by calling the hearth a new benchmark for authentic cuisine and a welcome return to the heart of cooking. The months leading up to the opening were a blur of paint samples, permits, and panic hiring staff, designing the menu, sourcing suppliers. I decided on the name. It was a simple decision, really. It had to be my name, Eleanor's. I wanted it to be unmistakable. I wanted it to be a statement. The night before we opened, I stood in the empty dining room. The tables were set, the menus were printed, the kitchen was stocked. It was real. The fear was there, a cold knot in my stomach. But underneath it was a steady. The phone started ringing off the hook. The reservations site crashed. But all I could think about was you. I didn't feel triumph. I felt a weird, hollow sadness. The victory was complete. But it tasted nothing like I thought it would. A week later you came in. It was a Tuesday afternoon right before we opened for dinner. The dining room was empty and quiet. You stood by the door for a minute, just looking around. You looked tired. You walked over to the counter, where I was prepping. No hello, no small talk. You just looked at me and said, "I read the review." Your voice was flat. All the sharpness was gone from it. I didn't know what to say. "I am sorry, felt wrong. I told you, so it was even worse, so I just waited." You shook your head almost to yourself. "All that time, you said I was so busy trying to be the best I forgot to be good." You looked at the simple handwritten menu on the chalkboard. "You built a home here, I built a showroom." You finally met my eyes. There was no anger there, just a deep, profound exhaustion. And in that moment, I saw the whole thing clearly. Your mockery, your competitiveness. It was never really about me. It was about your own fear, the fear of not being enough. You had to tear me down to feel tall. You turned to leave, but you stopped at the door. You didn't look back. When you said it, "The bread really is incredible," and then you were gone. The space you left behind wasn't filled with gloating or celebration. It was just quiet. I had won. I had the review, the success, the validation. But the person I had wanted to share it with all those years ago, the friend who laughed with me in that tiny, messy kitchen, that person was gone. We had both gotten the restaurants we deserved. You got the spotlight, I got the hearth. And the warmth I felt standing in it was real. But it was also a lonely kind of warmth. The rivalry was over, the victory was mine. But the friendship was the final casualty, and that was a loss that no amount of praise could ever fill. The first day I walked into his kitchen, I thought I'd made it. The air was thick with the smell of roasting bones and fresh herbs. The clatter of pans was a symphony. And there he was, Chef Marco, standing in the center of it all like a general. He didn't even look at me. He just pointed to a sink full of leaks and said, "Start washing, and don't leave a speck of grit. I'll know if you do." That was the beginning, the brutal apprenticeship. I was a kid, really thought I knew how to cook, because I could make a decent meal for my friends. But this was a different language. Every movement had to be precise, every second counted, and nothing ever was good enough. I remember the first time I tried to julienne a carrot. I was proud of it. I thought the strips were pretty even. He picked one up, held it to the light, and let it drop onto the stainless steel table. "This is a julienne," he said, his voice flat. "This is what I'd expect from a school cafeteria. Do it again and again, until your fingers bleed if you have to. This is not a place for amateurs." Quiet confidence I had built with my own two hands. That was his mantra. "If you can't take the heat, get out of my kitchen." He'd say it with a cold smile. Usually, after reducing one of the other apprentices to tears, the turnover was incredible. People would last a week, sometimes just a day. They'd run out sobbing, and he'd just shrug and say, "One less distraction." I questioned my choice every single day. My hands were always cut up, my back ached constantly. The insults were a constant, low hum in my ears. "Your knife skills are an embarrassment. That sauce is an insult to the fish that died for it. Do you even have taste buds?" It was relentless. I'd go home at night and just lie on the floor staring at the ceiling, wondering why I was putting myself through it. The dream of being a chef started to feel like a punishment. But then something shifted. It was slow, almost imperceptible. I started to realize that buried deep within every sarcastic comment, every cutting remark, there was a kernel of truth, a brutal, undeniable fact. My knife skills were sloppy. That sauce was unbalanced. He wasn't just being cruel for the sake of it. He was pointing out flaws. But he was never ever wrong about the flaw itself. I began to listen differently. Instead of hearing "You're useless," I started to hear "Your emulsion is breaking." Because you're adding the oil too fast, the insult was the packaging. But the content was a lesson, a brutally delivered soul-crushing lesson. But a lesson nonetheless. My food began to change, my cuts became cleaner, my sauces more refined, my palate sharper. I could taste, when something was a fraction of a gram off. Id developed a kind of radar for imperfection, the same radar he had. It became a strange love-hate relationship. I resented him, I dreaded going to work. But I also had this immense respect for his palate, for his knowledge. The results were undeniable, the food we produced was transcendent, and I was a part of that. I was learning from the best, even if the teaching method felt like torture. The decision to leave didn't come from a place of defeat. It wasn't that I couldn't take the heat anymore, it was that I knew if I stayed, I would only ever learn to cook his food. I would become a reflection of his bitterness. I had to take this incredible, hard-won technical foundation and build my own house on top of it. So I gave my notice. He didn't even look up from the stock he was skimming, he just grunted, finally quitting. He said I told him I was moving on. He shrugged. Good luck, y'all need it. That was the last thing he ever said to me. For the next few years, I worked everywhere I could. I traveled, I cooked in small bistros and busy hotels. I was figuring out my own voice, and the whole time Marco's voice was in my head. But now it was a tool, not a weapon. Id taste a dish and think needs more acid, and I could hear his scoff. But id also think, but how can I make that correction with warmth, with generosity? That was the key, the contrast. I wanted a kitchen known for its excellence, but also for its positivity, a place where people weren't afraid to make a mistake, because that's how you learn, the exact opposite of the environment I had endured. Opening my own place was terrifying. Every doubt Id ever had came rushing back. What if he was right? What if I was just an amateur after all? But the night we opened, something clicked. The dining room was full, the kitchen was buzzing. But it was a calm, focused buzz. My team was talking, laughing, even there was no fear. And the food was everything Id hoped. It was technically precise. The sauces were silky, the vegetables cut with a jeweler's attention, but it was also soulful. It felt like it was made with care. Opening night was a whirlwind. We were fully booked. The place was buzzing, the air thick with conversation and the smell of good food. I was in the kitchen, in the zone, calling out orders, plating dishes, my heart pounding. With a rhythm I understood. The reviews that started to trickle in online were glowing. People loved the food. They loved the intimate atmosphere. It was working. It was actually working. Not with fear. Word started to spread. Reviews called it an oasis of excellent food and genuine hospitality. They talked about the surprising atmosphere. They said the passion from the kitchen was palpable. That meant more to me than any star rating. Then one Tuesday night, I saw him. He was sitting at a corner table alone. He de-aged, his hair was grayer. But I'd know that posture anywhere. He was trying to be incognito, wearing a simple jacket. But his eyes were scanning the room like a critic, which of course he was. My heart just dropped into my stomach. The entire night, I was hyper-aware of his table. I plated every dish that went to him. Myself, I watched from the pass. As he took his first bite of the scallop crudo, he ate slowly, methodically. He didn't show any emotion, no smile, no scowl, just assessment. He went through the entire tasting menu. I was a wreck inside. But I kept my composure. I instructed my team to treat him like any other guest, no special attention. I wanted the food to speak for itself, with no context, no plea for approval. This was the final exam I never knew I was studying for. After his dessert, a simple lemon posset with rosemary shortbread, he asked to speak to the chef. My sous chef looked at me, eyes wide. I took a deep breath, wiped my hands on my apron, and walked out into the dining room. He was sitting there, sipping a black coffee. He looked up at me. And for a second, there was nothing in his eyes, no recognition. Then a flicker. You, he said. It wasn't a question. Chef, I said, nodding. He gestured to the empty chair across from him. I sat down. The noise of the restaurant seemed to fade away. It was just the two of us at that table. He didn't say anything for a long time. He just looked at me, then around the room, then back at me. I heard, "This place was good," he finally said. His voice was quieter than I remembered. I didn't believe it. And then there was Mark, my brother. He'd come over, plop himself on a stool, and watch me with this amused little smirk. At first I thought it was just his way, brotherly teasing. He'd poke fun at the chaos. What's this supposed to be, abstract art? He'd say, pointing at a plate where I was trying to arrange things with a bit of care. I'd laugh it off. It was just Mark. And then about a week in, my hostess came back to the kitchen. Her eyes were wide. Your brother is here. She said he doesn't have a reservation. I peeked through the pass-through window. And there he was, Mark, standing just inside the door, frozen. He was staring at the sign outside, then back into the restaurant. Then at the menu in his hand. His face was a canvas of pure unadulterated shock. He looked small. I just waited. My hands were clenched under the table. He pushed his dessert plate forward slightly. The posset, the balance of lemon and cream, is perfect, not too sharp, not too cloying. The texture is flawless. He paused. The shortbread, the rosemary is subtle. It doesn't overpower. It's a background note, intelligent. This wasn't praise, this was an analysis. But from him, it was everything. Then he looked me straight in the eye. The kitchen, he said. I could hear them. They weren't shouting, they were talking. He said the word like it was a foreign concept. You built this. I did, I said. He gave a slow, almost imperceptible nod. It was the smallest movement, but it felt like a seismic shift. There was no apology, there was no "I was wrong about you," there was just that nod, a nod of respect, the highest form of praise he was capable of giving. And in that moment, I understood everything: the mockery, the harshness, the brutal apprenticeship. It was all a crucible, a cruel, painful but effective catalyst. He had forged my technical skill. In a fire of criticism, he had given me an unshakable standard of excellence. My restaurant with my name on it wasn't a rejection of him. It was an evolution. It was proof that I had taken the heat, stayed in the kitchen, and ultimately learned to control the fire myself. I had taken his lessons and filtered out the poison, leaving only the pure, valuable technique behind. He had taught me how to build a perfect foundation, and I had chosen to build a welcoming home on top of it. He stood up, left money on the table for the bill, and walked out without another word. And that was the end of it, the final silent review. It was all I needed. I took a deep breath, wiped my hands on my apron, and walked out. The noise of the restaurant seemed to fade as I approached him. Mark, I said. My voice was calm, steadier than I felt. We're fully booked, but I think I can find a spot for you at the bar. He just stared at me, at the chef's jacket I was wearing. This is yours, he finally stammered. It is, I said. Eleonora's. I let the name hang in the air between us. I have to get back to the kitchen, but please have a seat. Dinner is on me. He sat at the bar, silent, watching the flow of the restaurant. I went back to the kitchen, my hands trembling. Now, this was the moment I had imagined 1,000 times. I'd pictured myself being angry, triumphant, maybe even throwing his old words back at him. But now that it was here, I just felt clear. I plated the dish myself, my signature dish, the one I had perfected through all those failures, the coq au vin. But my version, refined, elegant, everything my amateur attempt years ago was not. I brought it out to him, personally. I set it down in front of him. He looked from the plate to me, his expression unreadable. You did all this, he said. Not a question, just a statement of fact. I did, I replied, and in a strange way, I have to thank you. He flinched. Thank me? Yes, I said. Every time you told me I couldn't, it just made me more sure that I had to. Your doubt was the best motivation I could have asked for. He was quiet for a long time, then he picked up his fork and took a bite of the chicken. He chewed slowly, his eyes closed. And I saw it, a genuine reaction, no smirk, no condescension, just a man tasting food. When he opened his eyes, they were different. The arrogance was gone. Eleonora, he said, his voice quiet, almost a whisper. This is incredible, it's perfect. I was wrong, I was completely, totally wrong. But the comments started to get a little sharper, a little more specific. He'd take a bite of something I'd spent all afternoon on, something I was genuinely proud of. And he'd just shrug. Needs salt, he'd say, pushing the plate away. Or it's a bit bland, don't you think? Lacks that professional touch. The word amateur got thrown around a lot. It was his favorite word for me: amateur cook, amateur dreamer. He finished the entire meal. In silence, I watched him from the kitchen, the critic humbled, the mocking voice finally quiet. When he was done, he caught my eye and just nodded, a gesture of respect. There was no grand scene, no dramatic reconciliation, just a simple, honest compliment that meant more than any review. He paid his bill, leaving a generous tip, and left. I stood there, in the warm, noisy heart of the restaurant that bore my name, and finally felt the weight lift. The underdog story was over. I wasn't an underdog anymore, I was a chef. Remember that dinner at your uncle's 60th birthday? The big loud one at the old banquet hall. The air was thick with the smell of overcooked roast beef and cheap perfume. Everyone was there, all the aunts and uncles and cousins you only see at weddings and funerals. I was in the kitchen helping your Aunt Martha plate the desserts. Id brought this lemon tart. Id spent all morning on the crust, was perfect blind baked, until it was just golden. The filling was this bright, sharp, sweet thing I was genuinely proud of. You came in looking for more ice. You saw me slicing it. You leaned against the doorframe with that smirk, the one you always got when you were about to deliver a line. You didn't even whisper. Your voice carried over the clatter of plates, still playing with easy bake ovens. How you chuckled. You know, some people just don't have the palate for it. It's a gift, really saves you from wasting good ingredients. Aunt Martha went quiet. The cousins by the fridge stopped talking. The only sound was the hum of the refrigerator. Everyone heard it. My face felt hot. But the heat didn't turn into embarrassment. It cooled down instantly into something solid, something hard. I looked at you, at your smug, laughing eyes. And I didn't see a joke. I saw a finish line in that moment, with the lemon tart sitting right there between us. I decided I wasn't going to argue. I wasn't going to try to prove you wrong with words. I was going to build something you couldn't laugh at. I started that night while you were still laughing with your brothers in the living room. I was on my phone in the guest bedroom. I wasn't looking up cooking schools. I was looking up business loans. I was looking at commercial real estate listings in the city. I found a forum for restaurant investors and just read for hours. I knew I couldn't tell a soul, especially not you. If you had even an inkling, you'd poison it. You'd mock the idea, pick apart every detail before it had a chance to grow. So I built a wall. On one side was my life with you, where I was the person who couldn't cook. On the other side was everything else. The double life was exhausting, but it was mine. I'd tell you I was going to a book club. Instead, I was in a professional kitchen downtown, a staging intern for Chef Alvaro, scrubbing pots at midnight for free, just to watch how he seared a scallop. My hands were raw from cleaning and chopping. I'd come home smelling of bleach and fish. And you joked that my book club must have met in a library basement. I'd just smile and say something about dusty old carpets. The worst was when I finally told him, my voice probably trembling a little, that I thought I wanted to do this for real, maybe open a place someday. He didn't just dismiss it. He laughed, a real front-the-belly laugh. You, he said, wiping his eyes, come on, be serious. This is a nice hobby. But a restaurant, that's a business. That's for chefs, not for, well, for you. You'd lose your shirt. He told me to stick to my day job, to keep my little hobby in its place. And the thing is, a part of me started to believe him that. I kept a notebook. It started with recipes, but it became more of a blueprint. I calculated how much I needed to save from my paycheck to afford a down payment in 5 years. I noted the names of every supplier Chef Alvaro used. I listened to the waitstaff complain about poorly designed menus and took notes. I learned about food costs, profit margins, the brutal math behind the beauty. I found my mentors in the shadows, Chef Alvaro, who saw the obsession in my eyes and started teaching me for real. Mrs. Gable, the retired restaurant critic, who lived in my apartment building, who became my strategic advisor over cups of tea. They were my secret counsel. You were completely unaware. You'd still make comments, of course, at a barbecue. You'd hand me a hot dog and say, here, this is more your speed. And I'd take it. I'd nod. And inside, I'd file it away. Each jab was just another brick in the foundation of the place I was building. The facade was the hardest part. I had to pretend to be worse than I was. I'd deliberately undersalt a pasta dish. If we had company, I'd burn a grilled cheese. I wanted the evidence to point in one direction, that I had given up, that you had won. Meanwhile, in a rented commissary kitchen on Sunday mornings, I was testing my own recipes. I must have made my signature dish, a coffee-rubbed duck breast with a cherry gastrique, 50 times. I tweaked it, perfected it, until it was something I knew was exceptional. I secured the investors through Mrs. Gable's contacts. They tasted my food. They believed in the vision. The lease for the space on Elm Street was signed in absolute secrecy. The name was my idea. I wanted it to be undeniable. I called it Claire's. The months leading up to the opening were a blur of construction and paperwork. The invitations for the soft opening went out. We sent one to your office, addressed formally to you and a guest. It was a simple, elegant card. It didn't say who the owner was. It just said, you are cordially invited to the grand opening of Claire's, 44 Elm Street. I knew you'd be curious. I knew your ego would assume it was a coincidence, maybe a different Claire. But you'd go. You'd have to see what it was. The night of the opening, the place was buzzing. Every table was full. The noise was a happy roar of conversation and clinking glass. I was in the kitchen expediting orders, my heart pounding. My floor manager, Sarah, tapped me on the shoulder. They're here, she said. Table 14. I took a breath and looked through the pass-through window. You and your wife were being seated. I saw you looking around, taking in the exposed brick, the soft, lighting the packed room. You looked confused, a little impressed against your will. You were studying the menu. I waited until your first course arrived, then I took off my apron, smoothed down my chef's jacket, and walked out of the kitchen. I walked right up to your table. You were criticizing the amuse-bouche to your wife, something about the texture of the Parmesan crisp. Then you saw me. Your eyes moved from my face down to the jacket, with my name embroidered on it, and back up. The confusion turned to disbelief. The color drained from your face. It was a perfect silent moment of understanding. You weren't a guest, you were the guest of honor. I smiled. It wasn't a warm smile, it was calm, professional. I am so glad you could make it, I said. My voice was steady. I insisted you be on the list. I wanted you to be the first to taste what I've been working on. You didn't say anything, you just stared. Your wife looked between us, completely lost. Little voice of doubt. His voice started to get louder than my own. Maybe he was right, maybe this was just a silly fantasy. The passion I felt started to feel heavy, like a secret I shouldn't be so proud of. Everything on the menu is a recipe I developed, I continued. But I'd recommend the duck, it was the most challenging to get right. I nodded to the server. Please, enjoy your meal, it's on the house. I turned and walked back to the kitchen. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I could feel your shock filling the room behind me the rest of the evening. I watched from the kitchen. I saw you eat. I saw you take the first bite of the duck. Your wife asked you a question, and you just shook your head slowly. You weren't criticizing anymore, you were just tasting. You finished everything on your plate. You even asked the server for a copy of the menu to take home. Later, as you were leaving, you caught my eye. You looked like you wanted to say something, maybe an apology, maybe another joke to diffuse the tension. But you didn't. There was nothing you could say. The food had said it. All the restaurant had said it. All the success was the statement. It wasn't a loud revenge. It was a quiet absolute when you walked out the door. And I knew I would never have to pretend to be less than I was again. The best revenge isn't about getting even, it's about moving so far past someone that their opinion becomes irrelevant. It's about building a monument to your own potential, and then inviting them to stand in its shadow. The air in my father's kitchen was always thick with the same smells: garlic and oregano, tomatoes simmering for hours, the rich, heavy scent of braised meat. It was a language I learned. Before I could speak, my hands knew the weight of his old wooden spoon, the exact tension of the pasta dough. He taught me to roll. By the time I was 10, it was a world of rules, sacred, unchangeable rules. And for a long time, I believed they were the only rules. I thought cooking was about memory, about recreating the past perfectly every single time. But then I started reading. I went to the market and saw ingredients my father never used. I'd bring home a bunch of fresh mint or a jar of smoked paprika, and he'd look at it like I'd brought a strange insect into his temple. His smile was always a little tight, a little patronizing. That's nice, kiddo, he'd say. But in this kitchen, we make food for people, not for art projects. I was 22. I'd spent my whole life in that kitchen, and I thought I'd earned the right to have an idea. Just when we were prepping for the weekend special, his famous lasagna, it was a masterpiece. I'll give him that, layers of painstakingly slow-cooked ragu basimela, so rich it was almost a custard. But I'd been thinking I'd tried a version with a little nutmeg and lemon zest in the ricotta mixture, some wilted spinach for a fresh earthy note. I presented it to him one quiet afternoon, a small square I'd made just for us to taste. He didn't even take a bite, he just looked at the green flecks in the white cheese, and his face darkened. What is this? He asked, his voice low. You think Nana would put grass in her lasagna? You think you know better than 100 years of our family? I tried to explain it was just an experiment, a way to brighten it up a little. That's when he laughed. It wasn't a happy sound. It was a cold, dismissive bark. You don't get it, he said, shaking his head. This food isn't about brightening up, it's about soul, it's about. The turning point was a birthday dinner, my birthday. I'd decided to make a complicated dish, a coq au vin from scratch. I'd researched it, followed all the steps, braised the chicken for hours, until it was fall off the bone tender. I was so nervous presenting it. I thought, this is it, this will show him. This is real food. He took a bite, chewed slowly, and put his fork down. The whole table was quiet. It's interesting, he said. And then he looked right at me. But it's just not there. The flavors are muddled. The presentation is history, something you clearly don't have the patience for. The real blow came a week later. We were catering a big family wedding, my uncle, my aunt, cousins. Everyone was there in the kitchen. A chaotic, joyful mess, I was tasked with the antipasto platter. I decided to make my own focaccia, to roast some peppers with a balsamic glaze, to arrange it all with fresh figs, and a sharp pecorino. I was proud of it. It looked beautiful. My father came over to inspect. He picked up a piece of the focaccia, sniffed it, and put it down. Then he turned to my uncle and said loud, "Enough for everyone to hear. Look at this. My son, the chef, thinks he can just throw pretty things on a plate and call it cooking. He can't even make a decent sauce without a recipe from some fancy magazine." The room got quiet. My face burned. He clapped me on the back, a gesture that was meant to look friendly, but felt like a shove. "Stick to what you know, kid. Yowl. Never have the instinct. This business, it's in the blood, or it's nowhere." That was the moment the heat in my cheeks turned to ice in my veins. I looked at his hands, covered in flour, at the familiar scars on his fingers from a lifetime at the stove. And I knew I couldn't stay. I couldn't spend my life being his soulless assistant, my ideas treated as a joke. I quit that night. He was incredulous. "You're leaving to do what? To make your art project food for no one? Y'all be back. Y'all see. You can't make it on your own. Our name on the sign is the only reason people come through that door." The first year was a special kind of hell. I rented a tiny space in a part of town my father would have called trendy nonsense. It was just me, a second-hand stove, and a mountain of debt. I had no name to use. I couldn't bear the thought of trading on the family reputation he was so sure I needed, so I didn't. I called it Demani tomorrow. It was a quiet promise to myself. The menu was my rebellion. I took the flavors of my childhood, and I bent them. I made a risotto with our traditional sausage, but I added sweet peas and a bright lemon cream. I made panna cotta, but infused it with basil, and served it with a strawberry balsamic compote. It was a risk. People would come in expecting one thing and get another. Some hated it. They wanted the heavy, familiar comfort of my father's place. They said my food was confusing. But slowly, a different crowd started to find me. Younger couples, people who traveled, who were curious. They didn't want to eat the same meal their grandparents ate. They wanted to be surprised. They'd tell me they could taste the history in the dish. But it felt new, alive. I worked 18-hour days. My body ached in ways it never had in my father's kitchen. This was my own exhaustion, my own struggle. There was no one to blame, no one to resent. It was terrifying and exhilarating. I'd hear snippets about my father's place. Business was fine, steady. The old guard was still loyal. I knew he was watching me. I'd see one of his regulars slip in, probably out of curiosity, probably reporting back to him. I knew he was waiting for me to fail. The review in the city's weekly paper changed everything. The critic came in anonymously, and she got it. She wrote that Demani was a breathtaking dialogue between heritage and innovation, that the food honored the past without being a prisoner to it. She singled out my lasagna, the very dish that had started it all. She called it a revelation. The phone started ringing, and didn't stop. We were booked out for months. I had to hire more staff. I remember standing in the middle of my own busy kitchen, the noise and energy. "Well, it's a nice effort for a home cook. Nice effort." That was the phrase that did it. It wasn't outright cruel, but it was so condescending, so final. It wasn't a critique of the food anymore. It was a critique of my very possibility swirling around me, and I felt a strange calm. It was real. I had done it not with his name, but with my own two hands and my own ideas. It was a Tuesday night, about 2 years after I'd left. We were in the middle of the dinner rush. The dining room was full, a low, happy hum of conversation and clinking silverware. I was plating a dish, my head down, focused. I felt a shift in the air, a sudden quiet at the front of the house. I looked up, and I saw him. He was standing just inside the door, alone. He looked smaller than I remembered. He was just looking around, his eyes taking in the exposed brick, the modern lighting, the open kitchen. He was studying the menu board, and then his eyes stopped and locked on the sign above the door, the sign that just said Demani, and right below it my name, just my name, not his, not the family name, mine. He didn't see me watching him. His face was unreadable for a moment, a blank mask. Then something in him seemed to soften. The hard, proud line of his shoulders slumped just a little. He wasn't looking at a rival. He was looking at a fact, a reality he had said was impossible. He stood there for a long time, just looking at my name on the wall. He didn't come in. He didn't ask for a table. He just turned slowly and walked back out into the night. There was no dramatic confrontation, no admission that I was right, but in that silence, in the way he looked at the name that belonged only to me, I felt everything. I felt the end of an argument that had defined my life. I had spent so long trying to prove him wrong, to show him I had the instinct he said I lacked. But in that moment, I realized I hadn't just been proving it to him, I had been proving it to myself. And the proof was right there written on the wall in the busy room in the food, on every plate the legacy wasn't in the recipes, he guarded so fiercely. It was in the courage to create my first day in that kitchen. I thought I'd made it. The air was thick with the smell of searing meat and reduced sauces, a haze of steam and smoke, hanging under the fluorescent lights. It was a temple, and I was just a new acolyte. And he was the high priest chef Michael Anders. His name was spoken with a kind of reverence, or maybe it was fear. I learned the difference quickly. He ruled the line like a dictator. Every plate that left the pass was a reflection of him, and God help you if the reflection was flawed. My first task was peeling potatoes. He came by, picked up a peeler, and demonstrated like this. He said, his voice, a low growl, no waste. See the thickness of your peel, that is money you are throwing in the compost. You understand nothing, and that was on a good day. The mockery became the background music of my life, louder than the clatter of pans and the hiss of the grill. Id played a beautiful piece of cod, a delicate beurre blanc, a perfect quenelle of potato. He'd lean over it, his shadow falling across the white porcelain. What is this? He'd ask, not to me, but to the entire kitchen. This is home cooking. This is what your grandmother makes. We are not your grandmother's kitchen. We are artists here. Then he'd take his spoon, scoop up the sauce, and let it drip back onto the plate from a height, splattering it. It lacks courage, it lacks soul, or perhaps you have no soul to give it. I cried that night, not just because of the comment, but because of the weight of all the comments, the accumulated dismissal. And then lying in bed, something in me just snapped, or maybe it clicked into place. This fire he kept trying to stamp out, it wasn't going to die. It was the only thing that kept me warm. If he thought this was just a hobby, I would make it my life. If he thought I was an amateur, I would become a professional. The doubt he planted became the seed of my determination. He knew I wanted my own place. Everyone did. It was the dream you whispered to the other line cooks during family meal. When Chef was in his office, someone must have talked. He cornered me one night after service, the kitchen silent and slick with grease. I hear, you have ambitions, he said, not looking at me, but wiping down his station with a ruthless efficiency. A restaurant with your name on the door. He finally turned, and his smile was a thin, cold line. A cute idea, but a name on a door requires a reputation. And you have the hands of a clumsy child. You will never be good enough. You are a follower, not a leader. This industry eats dreamers like you for breakfast. It was a culture of hazing, of breaking you down. He called it paying your dues. I called it a slow, systematic destruction of my spirit. The other cooks, they were just as broken, too scared to offer a kind word. We were islands in a sea of anxiety. After a year, I was a ghost. I'd go home smelling of onions and failure, my hands shaking. The passion I had for food, the joy of creating something beautiful, it had been leached out of me. One night, I plated a dessert, a chocolate tart, and I felt nothing, no pride, no satisfaction. It was just a thing I had assembled under duress. That was the night I knew I had to leave. I walked out and never went back. For months I didn't cook. I couldn't bear the sight of a chef's knife. I thought he was right. I was a fraud. I got a job doing something else, something quiet, where no one yelled. But you can't outrun a true calling. It starts as a whisper for me. It was at a farmer's market. I saw a basket of heirloom tomatoes, their colors uneven, beautifully imperfect. I bought one, took it home, sliced it, sprinkled it with salt, and ate it. And it tasted like food, real food, not a component in a chef's ego-driven masterpiece, but sustenance. It had a soul. I started cooking again, but just for me. I traveled. I went to Italy and watched nanas make pasta by hand, not for glory, but for their families. I went to Southeast Asia and saw street vendors create miracles of flavor over a single burner. They cooked with joy. There was no intimidation, only a genuine desire to feed people, to make them happy. That was the philosophy that started to grow in me. The antithesis of everything Anders stood for. His food was about control, about imposing his will on the ingredients. Mine, I realized, was about collaboration. It was about letting the tomato taste like a tomato, the fish taste like the sea. It was about respect. The dream came back, but it was different this time. It wasn't about having a famous restaurant with my name and lights. It was about building a kitchen, a real one, not a boot camp, but a workshop, a place where people could learn, where mistakes were part of the process, not a capital crime. I wanted a dining room that felt like a welcome embrace, not a hall of judgment. It took years, saving every penny, writing a business plan that centered on staff well-being as much as profit margins. I found investors who believed in the vision, not just the bottom line. The next morning I enrolled in culinary school. It was a huge risk. I had to scale back my hours at my safe, sensible job. Mark found out, of course, culinary school. He said over the phone, his voice dripping with disbelief. So you're going to pay someone to tell you what I've been telling you for free? That this is a waste of your time, you're throwing your money away. But this time, his words didn't hurt. They fueled me. Every time he expressed skepticism, I'd go home and practice knife cuts until my fingers. When Gardenia opened it, was with a quiet confidence, not a roar. The name was a tribute to my mother. But it was my vision on the plate. We were small, maybe 30. Covers, the walls were warm, the lighting soft. The open kitchen wasn't a stage for a tyrant. It was a window into a calm, focused hive of activity. And the food, it was simple in the best way. We sourced everything hyper-locally. Our menu changed with the seasons, sometimes with the week. It was food that felt alive. The buzz started slowly. A food blogger wrote about the unpretentious revolution on our plates. An influencer posted a video of our signature dish, a roasted chicken, with preserved lemon and herbs, calling it the most honest chicken I've ever eaten. The real critics came. They wrote about the atmosphere, the palpable sense of peace in the dining room. They wrote about the technical precision that was so effortless it felt invisible. They wrote about the joy in the food. We got a star. Then another. My name, the one he said would never mean anything, started to carry weight. I heard the rumors. Of course, the industry is a small world. Anders' place. Anders was still open, still serving his classic rigid French cuisine. But it was starting to feel dated, stale. I heard he was losing his best sous chefs to places with better cultures. And I heard he was talking about me in an interview. A journalist asked him about the new wave of chef-on spots. He mentioned Gardenia offhandedly. It's a trend. He was quoted as saying, a populist gimmick, comfort food for people who don't know any better. It lacks the discipline of a true kitchen. It won't last. The hostess came to find me on a Tuesday night, a slow night. She looked a little nervous. Chef, she said, table 7, it's him. I didn't need to ask who. I walked to the pass and looked through the window into the dining room. There he was, sitting alone at a corner table. He'd tried to be discreet, wearing a simple cap. But I'd know that posture anywhere. The rigid spine, the way he held his head, like he was surveying a battlefield. He was studying the menu with a scowl. My heart hammered against my ribs. Every old instinct kicked in, the fear, the desire to prove myself to him, the ghost of his voice, telling me I wasn't good enough. I took a deep breath. I looked around my kitchen. My team was working, talking, quietly helping each other. There was no yelling, there was just the sound of good work. I remembered why I was here. This wasn't for him, this was for me. I cooked for him myself. I didn't make anything special, nothing overly complex to try and show off. I made the dish that was the heart of our menu, right. Then a fillet of wild halibut, seared until the skin was crackling, crisp, served on a bed of spring peas and fava beans, with a light broth made from their shells, and a touch of mint. It was a dish about freshness, about simplicity, about the ingredients speaking for themselves. I watched from the pass as the server set it down in front of him. He looked at it with that same critical glare. He picked up his fork and knife. He broke a piece of the fish, making sure to get a bit of the skin, a bit of the pea broth. He lifted it to his mouth. And I saw it. I saw the exact moment his entire worldview fractured. His shoulders, which were always so tense, dropped just a fraction. His eyes, which were always narrowed in judgment, widened slightly. He chewed slowly. He didn't look around the room. He just stared at the plate. He took another bite and another.